If you imagine that the XYZ playground is a real physical playground and there's like a wall around it, and there are like different windows you can watch through, and you can have a conversation with people on the playground. That's a bit from a visual aspect. That's what's going to be. So it's like a window to the XYZ playground and an engagement possibility with the XYZ playground. So what we have set out to look into is doing deep dive conversation on specific topics, like we have had inside the Jens Heitland Show, as a deep dive on different ways of thinking, different topics and different interests we work with. Then what we said is we want to engage with the young thinkers, and we want to engage with experienced thinkers inside a podcast format where we have a discussion with specific people, where they share their stories, where they share their perspectives, specifically all on the reverse mentorship, and how we can learn their expertise inside the reverse mentorship perspective. And then what we also said, we will set up group discussions where we bring different perspectives on a round table into one room, into one virtual room, where we can discuss different opinions, and as well have maybe examples of the XYZ playground as an outlook into a podcast situation where, hey, there's an experienced thinker and there's a young thinker, and they have an interaction with each other, and we are able to listen in, or we are able to watch it when we are looking at on the videos. So that's at least the first ideas, and of course we will be further prototyping and waiting for your feedback, how you think it is, and then basically taking that forward step by step inside a separate medium, which will be then again a podcast. Today's show is another XYZ Playground Edition, where I meet with Joshua, exploring how leaders of today can learn from leaders of tomorrow. Today's topic is the Reverse Mentor Lab. Please welcome to the show, Joshua. Hello, Joshua. Good morning. How are you doing?
Jens, great to see you. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, always fun and great to connect and looking into what's happening now. So last week we chatted about what's happening with the XYZ Playground special editions we have done on the Jens Heitland Show, and how we did this as a prototype, went more into details. For those who haven't been listening to that episode, have a listen to that episode, watch the episode on YouTube if you're dialing into the video versions. So today we thought about introducing the Reverse Mentor Lab, which will be a separate podcast, which I highly recommend to everyone of you subscribing as well, because it's an interesting perspective. It's really dialing into that, and we will tell you more about that today. So, Joshua, what are we talking?
What are we talking about? I think, Jens, we keep saying this in a lot of conversations that we have when we set up time to do a dedicated podcast. And we always say, shucks, we should have been recording that, because we've come up with some great nuggets and things like that. So let's do our best to come up with those nuggets again in this conversation. So in a nutshell, what are we talking about today? We're here to give you a bit of an insight into what you can expect from the Reverse Mentor Lab. And so maybe to start off, let's start with what is the Reverse Mentor Lab. So the Reverse Mentor Lab is essentially a window into the thinking, ideas, concepts, and exploratory nature that we're creating inside of the XYZ Playground. So for those who might be tuning in for the first time, let me just quickly explain what the XYZ Playground is. So the XYZ Playground is an engagement space where we're creating a space and an environment where the leaders of today can learn and connect with the leaders of tomorrow inside of that space. And that's something that Jens and I are both passionate about, and we've been building out over the next couple of months, and we've got some exciting announcements going forward. But we've been experimenting with different conversations around the XYZ Playground, and so a couple of weeks ago we decided to spin up the Reverse Mentor Lab. And so essentially inside of this space, we're going to be looking to have different types of conversations. And Jens, I'm going to hand the mic back over to you in a minute to tell us a bit more about those different types of conversations that we'll be having and how we'll be doing that. But I think the biggest thing is that we're wanting to create a space where people can share their ideas and also engage with an audience outside of just some of the nuclear audiences that they find themselves in on a day-to-day life. So Jens, what are some of the types of conversations that we'll be having on the Reverse Mentor Lab?
Yeah, so I want to make that a little bit visual to the listeners and as well to the ones who are checking out the videos. So if you imagine that the XYZ Playground is a real physical playground and there's like a wall around it, and there are like different windows you can watch through, and you can have a conversation with people on the playground. That's a bit from a visual aspect. That's what's going to be. So it's like a window to the XYZ Playground and an engagement possibility with the XYZ Playground. So what we have set out to look into is doing deep dive conversation on specific topics, like we have had inside the Jens Heitland Show, as a deep dive on different ways of thinking, different topics and different interests we work with. Then what we said is we want to engage with the young thinkers, and we want to engage with experienced thinkers inside a podcast format where we have a discussion with specific people, where they share their stories, where they share their perspectives, specifically all on the reverse mentorship, and how we can learn their expertise inside the reverse mentorship perspective. And then what we also said, we will set up group discussions where we bring different perspectives on a round table into one room, into one virtual room where we can discuss different opinions, and as well have maybe examples of the XYZ Playground as an outlook into a podcast situation where, hey, there's an experienced thinker and there's a young thinker, and they have an interaction with each other, and we are able to listen in, or we are able to watch it when we are looking at on the videos. So that's at least the first ideas, and of course we will be further prototyping and waiting for your feedback, how you think it is, and then basically taking that forward step by step inside a separate medium, which will be then again a podcast.
Yeah, brilliant. And I love the framing that you gave there about making it visual. And it's something that I think sometimes that we forget about when we converse on different mediums, is that we just assume that, we're seeing one another across this Zoom call today, but there are different people who may be listening to it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or watching it on YouTube. And so it's an important reminder to think about how we actually communicate things in these different formats. And maybe, Jens, just to double click on those three great examples that you gave in terms of the types of conversations and engagement that we're going to be creating inside of the Reverse Mentor Lab, and to talk maybe a bit about how we're thinking about bringing sustainability into those conversations. And in a previous conversation, you can go back and listen to it on an earlier episode, is our thinking behind sustainability and how we are challenging different people inside both organizations and indeed in their own mindsets to think about sustainability, not only in related to environmental challenges that we face. So Jens, maybe if we can just shoot the breeze a bit and chat a bit about how we think about sustainability, how young thinkers can share their ideas through the Reverse Mentor Lab and indeed inside the XYZ Playground, and also how established thinkers can come and solve some big problems and present some ideas around sustainability on the Reverse Mentor Lab as well.
Yeah. If we start high level, it's really, sustainability is so huge, or the sustainability challenges we have and we are facing in this world are so huge that there's nobody who can tackle them alone. And I know, and it should be a lot of initiatives around the globe tackling these topics like climate change and equality and a lot of other things. But what we said is we want to do that in a specific way. We want to enable people around the globe and businesses around the globe to do that in a specific way. And that's the reverse mentorship perspective. So it's how do we tackle, as an example, climate change with the perspective that we bring young thinkers and experienced thinkers together, driving solutions. So for us, it's really how do we not just creating an exchange on solving climate change and solving sustainability issues, how do we drive actions with what we are doing? By providing a platform, providing an engagement possibility that leads to action. So that's really important for me from a sustainability perspective. There are a lot of people talking, but we need to get into doing. And that's basically what we want to establish, going from engaging straight away to creating an outcome in every engagement we will be having. And that will lead then to actions that follow actions. And then we basically create the domino effect that with a small thing, which is a platform thinking on the XYZ Playground perspective, we create a domino that's helping to get sustainability problems to be solved over time. And if we can be a little tiny piece in solving the sustainability problems, I will be personally at least very, very happy to have started that and spend a bit of time in that.
Yeah, and I think that that's a great analogy that you used around the domino effect and also the small pieces and how they all fit together. And I think, going back to something that you mentioned earlier in the conversation around the window that the Reverse Mentor Lab offers into the XYZ Playground. And I think that you'll see as the Reverse Mentor Lab progresses and as it develops, the types of conversations will give you a flavor and an experience in terms of what we are trying to create inside of the XYZ Playground itself. And also to double click on the word doing that you mentioned, Jens. And I think that when we think about big ideas and sometimes we don't know where to start, and that's the importance of having these types of conversations that we're going to have on the Reverse Mentor Lab, to share different types of thinking, to connect from a diversity perspective, but also to promote collective action and collective thought processes driving that forward. And then if you're keen to look at how do we do this and what can you do as an individual or as a business, then let's connect inside the XYZ Playground and come and explore those doing concepts so that we can work with you to drive some sustainable outcomes into the future to help create a better world.
Yeah. And to that point, I think it's, if everyone goes into it with a mindset of, I want to give to create the change rather than I want to take to create the change, everyone will win. And that's been going into the point of the leadership we are looking into to create. Can you elaborate a little bit on the leadership perspective?
Yeah. My pleasure. So I think maybe to start off with, when we talk about leadership, is that we're saying that there's a shift that is happening and how can we all partake in that shift? So leadership is built off the word leadership and basically saying that there's a shift in leadership. So if you search the hashtag leadership, you might come up with some interesting thought-provoking topics that will come up, and you'll soon to be seeing the XYZ Playground and the Reverse Mentor Lab playing inside of that space. But I think maybe to double click on some of the things that we're looking to achieve by doing that. So the first is we wanted to create a space that is bi-directional in nature. And what I mean by that is leadership, sometimes when you think about leadership, is that we think about it from a top-down perspective. We don't necessarily think about it from a bottom-up perspective. And I think that inside of using a reverse mentor model, we're looking to create that space where leadership can happen. And what we mean by that is it's bi-directional. So just as I've learned from Jens in terms of some of the things that I've established myself as a young leader inside of the space, he's learned things that from me in terms of practices that he's taken into his business and his practices going forward. And so we're wanting to create that space where there's bi-directional learning opportunities and mentorship on both sides of the coin, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And if we take this full circle, that's really like even to the way that we set up this experiment inside of my podcast, where we looked into how do we do this, how do we kind of prototype our way through it and bring that back, even to the extent of how we set up the XYZ Playground platform from an organizational structure early on last year. I think this is an opportunity, engaging with each other, learning from each other, and then bring that back into whatever business you are working with. And that's why I've said I will commit myself for to spend a lot of time into it, and as well utilizing the platform I have created, which is my podcast, and bringing that forward and prototyping basically while we are doing it. And then now, as we have decided to bringing that into at least the podcast version, bringing it into a separate podcast, the Reverse Mentor Lab, that allows us then to go narrow again and focus on things we want to drive forward. And I think that's really a key point that's the part of learning and giving and taking from each other going forward. And I really appreciate that. I can really say a big, deep thank you to Joshua that you have been willing and are willing to do that further as well. But even doing the prototype on this podcast format was something you said directly yes when we came up with the idea. So really appreciate that as well. You spent a lot of time in driving these things forward. And it's really, for me, that's now a closing the XYZ perspective inside of my podcast, going into all the innovation topics going forward, but as well reminding everyone who's listening that it is basically an innovation process we have built up. We have worked through over the period. We did this special edition episodes, which are called the XYZ edition inside of my podcast, and now it's really something that's going to live. It's like a small acceleration process or program we did on the side. So it's exciting to be part of that, and it's also exciting to host the other things going forward, and then really bringing you back on the Jens Heitland Show as a guest, and then interviewing you how it's going, so that the listeners who are only on the Jens Heitland Show get a flavor in between of what's happening. So it's also exciting to do that. Yeah, again, big thank you, Joshua, for being part of it. It's a pleasure to know you and a pleasure to work with you in the things going forward.
Thanks, Jens. I can definitely say it's right back at you, and I'll echo a lot of what you've said. So I won't repeat it, but maybe just to say, in terms of the space that you're creating and the words that you use around give is incredibly powerful. And I think that is something that we can all take away from the way that we think about things, our mindset, especially in this time. We've been dealing with COVID-19 now for going on close to 16 to 18 months. And I think that inside of this time, we know that we need to do things differently. And how can we do things differently as individuals? Because like you mentioned, if we can play a small part in changing some of the mindsets out there and changing some of the organizations and the practices that we instill in the world that we live in, we can then be very proud of what we're creating. So I look forward to the journey ahead. Thank you for agreeing to a prototype in the first place. Thanks for creating the space. And yeah, I look forward to what lies ahead and coming back to the Jens Heitland Show in time to share a bit about how the Reverse Mentor Lab and the XYZ Playground is progressing.
Yeah. So for all you listeners out there, please check out the Reverse Mentor Lab podcast wherever you enjoy your podcast, on Spotify, Google, of course, iTunes or Apple Podcast. If you're interested into the video version, check out the XYZ Playground YouTube channel, where all of the videos will be present as well. Of course, if you want to, you are welcome to stay on the Jens Heitland Show and subscribe and download more videos and whatever I'm doing. But I really, really, really would deeply appreciate if you give us feedback, if you engage with us going forward, if you subscribe to the different things. Every single subscriber means a million to me. It's really amazing that you spend the time in just listening to us and being part of our journey. So thank you for that, and see you again in the next podcast.